Hello everybody, Andrew Blake from the digitalaudiomanual.com. Today we move on to our third video as we continue discussing the FlexPhraser of Halion Sonic7 in Cubase 13. But before we start, are you looking for something more complete in your online search for answers? Something that brings you all the tips, but then fills in all that missing space around them? Something that is built from the ground up with the purpose of removing confusion and all those other negative things that you experience in the winding road of endless information? Presenting the all-new Digital Audio Manual Preferred. This is a series of videos that will help move you along the path from wherever you are now to a higher level of knowledge and understanding. The whole concept is based on taking the vast majority of information that's available in the manuals of some of your favorite programs like Cubase or Wavelab or many others that are in the works, and then presents them to you in a fresh new way. All these videos are laid out like the manual, the subjects are titled like the manual, the information is searchable like the manual, all with one gigantic difference. Everything is demonstrated in real-time situations. It gives you examples and processes to learn and use all the information. And you're going to see, just like so many have done already, it's literally a treasure chest of hidden and rarely explained features and functions, all leading you step by step from the beginning to end, empowering you with a new language set in the programs you may have already been using for years, or even if you're just getting started. So if this sounds interesting to you, come and be part of a clear path to a better way to learn. Click on the link below to get access, and I will see you on the inside. All right, let's get started. So today let's start out talking about recording the MIDI output in the FlexPhraser. We talked about it briefly in the previous video, and I kind of give you some caution in terms of things may not sound exactly like you expect. Well, here's what you have to be aware of. First of all, the principle here is the FlexPhraser itself relies on what MIDI notes you play in the first place. If I hit a key, that causes the FlexPhraser to play that. If I hold a chord down, then that's going to cause the Phraser to play something. And in this case, where I've dragged a chord track in, the chord track is playing the FlexPhraser. And all of those are going to give you different results depending on what notes are played. The basic steps to do this is simply hit the record button. At that point, the drag MIDI light's going to start to flash. And then if you play a phrase, like I'm going to play this whole phrase here, once the phrase has been performed the way you want it, come down, hit the record button again. At that point, this drag MIDI light's going to stay lit. Then you grab it with your mouse, drag it onto the track, and you'll have a MIDI phrase that plays exactly like what you just recorded. Now, a couple of things you got to pay attention to so you're not surprised by the result. If you leave the FlexPhraser on, these notes that got recorded by MIDI are now going to replay into the FlexPhraser, and you're basically going to get a doubled performance, which may be affected by these other settings that you have in here. If you want to just hear a true recording of what you just captured, come over and turn the FlexPhraser off by hitting the activate light. Now if I hit this MIDI that I dragged in, I get a great performance from the FlexPhraser. I can double click on this MIDI and I can edit it right in the key editor if I want to make some changes to it. Another thing I want to pass along is I've had great results with rendering the FlexPhraser, even with these very complicated performances. If I go back to my entered chords, which if I turn the FlexPhraser off, have a very basic sound like this. FlexPhraser back on. If I now take this track and do a render in place, I get an audio bounce from that FlexPhraser, and it gives me a great performance of what I just had. And at this point, that uses very little CPU power, but it gives me a great performance of what the FlexPhraser was doing. Okay, so when you're ready to have some fun, now that we've kind of had an overview of this basic FlexPhraser operation, open up your Halion Sonic, come up with this icon that says All, stands for all your different instrument sets, whatever you have. You'll see a little search screen up here. In this search screen, you could type bass, guitar, or any other instrument that you're looking for, but you can also type in the word Flex, F-L-E-X. And if you do that and hit enter, you're going to get some demos of instruments that have been set up specifically to use the FlexPhraser. And at that point, you can just click on any of these, which I'm going to do to help you audition a few of them. And you really get to see some of the power of what the FlexPhraser can do. Now again, I'm not sure what instrument sets are just native in Cubase and which ones I have because I already own Halion. I'm sure you're going to get some kind of demonstration in your set, whatever you have. But if I play a few that you don't have, just move on to some other ones. Let's go from the top here. First choice I have is Deep House Flex. If I double click on this, it opens the Deep House Flex over in the instrument section. And I have some instrument pads here I can play. Let me click on a few of these. Now let's do a quick analysis of what we have here. If I look up on the top, originally we talked about the program and then the different layers. As I can see here, layer 1 is lit up on this particular sound that I have. If I go back to the program tab, the FlexPhraser is inactive on the program. It's specifically turned on an individual layer. Now this sound only has one layer, but as you can see, we have the option to turn a FlexPhraser on a specific layer if we want. And that's what's happened here. Other than that, all the settings are the same. We still activate it. We have the loop, we have the sync, all the different settings, variation. You can drag the MIDI, everything that we had before on the program level, but now it's specific to just this one layer. And if we have a sound with multiple layers, each one of these could have their own little FlexPhraser. Let's move on and look at some other ones. Here's one that says Flex Phrased Accordion. It has 2 different layers on it, and the FlexPhraser is on the program level. It sounds like this. Here's one that says Flex Phrased Blues Organ. I just push one key down. There's a Flex Phrased Country Strat. This sound switches between the regular Strat sound. If you change the variation, you get harmonics. Here's the regular. Here's the harmonics. Here's one that mimics a nylon guitar. Flex Phrased Folk Nylon. It has 3 different variations. If I hit the first variation, then just hit one key with my mouse here. Go to the next variation, hit a key. Go to the next variation, hit a key. Here's a Flex Phrase Pizzicato. If I hit just a single note, and then I can hit one of these variations. And then if I'm playing it and I hit the variations, I get something like this. Variation. We have a couple more. Let's check these out. One says Flex Phrased Whirly. Again, I have variations. If I hit the first variation, then hit one key. Go to a different variation, hit a key. And then the last one we'll look at here, it says a Spanish Flight Flexi. It has all the pads assigned to chords and the default key switches. No doubt, there's lots of fun to be had with that. All right, so let's talk about the variations on the FlexPhraser. Right now, if I play this chord track and there's no FlexPhraser, I have just the simple chords. The minute I turn on the FlexPhraser and play the chord pattern, whatever phrase I have here takes over. Now on the right, we have these options to create variations. Many of the presets that you bring up that have FlexPhrasers will already have variations built into them. Let's build them from scratch so you get the basic idea. So we'll leave this pattern that we have on this first variation. Now let's go to number 2 variation, and we'll go to our phrase list, and we'll just find another phrase down here. I'm going to go to clavinet 2. Let's see how that sounds. Now let's go to variation 3, light that up. Same thing, let's find another different phrase here. Go to the reggae category, go to reggae 2C1. Let's see how that sounds. Now I have 3 variations built in. I can hit number 1, play the song, hit variation number 2, hit number 3. Now, once we have these variations in place, we can begin to change things if we want. Let's make a change with this octave setting. Go back to my variation 1, play it, turn the octaves up. If I want to use these trigger pads with my variations, I can just pick one of these variations. Let's stay on number 1, and I'll go to this first trigger pad and right-click on it. And I go to the option that says Snapshot the Variation. Puts a little yellow line above it. Now that variation is on that pad. Let's go to my variation 2. Let's go to my pad 2, right-click on it. Say Snapshot the Variation. Let's go to number 3, come down to the trigger pad, right-click, say Snapshot the Variation. Now if I play the song and I hit one of my trigger pads, number 1 for example, I get that variation. Go to the second trigger pad or the third trigger pad. Once you get some of these phrases going, these different variations, you can right-click on any one of them and say copy that FlexPhraser variation. Now I can go to a different variation. Let's say to number 4. I can right-click on that one, and I can say paste the FlexPhraser variation. And now at this point, I can adjust this phrase. Maybe I want to come over to this trigger pad and say snapshot the variation. And now if I switch between variation 1, I have the high octaves, or I go to variation 4, and I have the lower octaves. Certain things like your loop and your sync option, the trigger mode, the restart mode, key mode, velocity, these can only be set one time for all the different variations. So then after you've been working with the pre-made flex phrases for a while, maybe you want to create your own. You have the option to turn on the user phrases. And then when you do that, you can go over and hit the edit button, which shows this editor. The first thing to notice when you open this up is that you can grab this handle and increase what steps are being used. You have up to 32 here. If I play the project and I drag this handle, I can see on the bottom an LED light moving as it goes through all these different steps. And I can increase it to full length or drag it back. Once you've extended this, you can easily draw velocities by clicking and dragging, and then you can redraw them as necessary. You can turn these steps on or off. One thing that has an effect on your flex phrases, on both the preset and on these user phrases, if I click this E button again, if I go down to the tempo scale, if I change this around, right now it's 1/16th, or I go to a quarter, or I go to an eighth, how it hits the notes is going to make a big difference. Let's leave it on an eighth for a minute. Back to the edit button. If you go to the right edge of any one of these steps, click on it and drag it, you can extend it to stretch over the other steps. It'll do this kind of a thing where it holds notes. Once you mess with this and start changing things around, you have some various options for resetting everything. Just right-click in an area here, and you get a context menu. You can reset the one step, reset all the steps, fill the gap, fill all the gaps, reset the length, reset all the lengths, reset the step and the length, reset all the steps and the lengths, and then enable all the steps. If you want to adjust a specific step, you use just about any one of these options. But if you want to reset everything and get it back to square one, go to the bottom and say enable all the steps, which turns everything on, and then go to the next option from the bottom that says reset all the steps and lengths, and that'll get you back to the original setting. You can grab your handle, pull it back if you want, and it's just like starting over. Just like your other presets for the FlexPhraser, user phrases have presets as well. You come down to any one of these categories, open them up. If you pick one of these, you'll get some basic patterns to start with. Again, I'm using a chord track to trigger this, so I have 4 different chords that are playing this FlexPhraser. One of the first things you want to experiment with, once you make some kind of little phrase of your own, or load one of these presets, go over to this option that says Mode, and you have a drop-down list, and you have all these different options from step, chord, up, down. Let me play through some of these. They're basically going to play the chords in different ways. So if I go to this first one that says step, it's just going to be a single note. But if I change to the one that says chord, now it's going to play full chords on every one of these. And the rest of these are just kind of variations. This one says up, so it's going to arpeggiate upwards. Next one says down. And then you just have variations of up and down or down and up. And you have one at the bottom that says random. You have the option to actually drag a MIDI groove onto this MIDI groove picture here. For example, if I take this phrase and then I take a groove agent, I'm going to set up something kind of drastic. I'll go up to my quantize and do a 16th triplet. I'll put in a bunch of kicks at a 16th triplet. So you get something like this. Right now the phrase is not following that. If I go to the MIDI part, click on it, and drag it up to this picture, now it is following it. If I right click on the picture and say clear the quantize, then it goes back to regular. Then you have this option to show this key select. There's a little icon, looks like a keyboard down here. And when you hit that, right next to it on the right, whatever notes you have, they're going to show the letter P above them. This is tied into this drop down up here that says mode. And mode has step, chord, up, down, one, and a bunch of options here. If it's on the option for step or chord, this key select option goes away. It can't be used in those two options. The minute you go to the third option, which is up, you're going to see all these letters show up. And those will stay there for each one of these other options. Now, if I play the song just like it is, you can see the LED moves through the steps like before. And what's happening here is as long as it shows the letter P, that's playing the phrase that we have, whatever that phrase is. But if I put my mouse over any one of these letters and I spin it, the first choices I have is the number 1 through 8, then it'll change to the letter L, and then it will change to the letter A. If I use any one of these other numbers as 1 through 8, what it's going to do is it's going to take a different note and play it in a different order. If I go all the way up to where it says L, it's going to take the last note, whatever that is, and always play it there. And if I spin it up to the letter A, it's going to take every note and play it like a chord. So what this allows you to do is take every single step in your arpeggio or phrase and change it into something basically completely different. So you talk about a sophisticated amount of choices. I'm going to play this and then just change a few of these around and watch how much it changes this little phrase. I'm going to start with this one and spin it up a couple. You can hear it repeating certain notes. I'll go over to this one and change it to a different one. I'll go to this one and change it to that A. Now it's hitting a chord. Just like that, I have this completely different phrase that I can change these different key select options to. Once I do that, I can go back up to the mode and I can go through these different options on the mode from up to down, and I'll get a whole bunch of different combinations that way. If I go from the key select to the one to the left of that, it shows the transpose values. And now these change into numbers, and I can move them to any key on the transpose scale. For example, let's say I take this one, which is 0, I spin it up an octave higher to the number 12. Let's go to this one and spin it up 2 octaves to 24. So you can get some pretty wild combinations doing that. On the left, you have these options to select velocity, control. When it's on velocity, you can easily just take your mouse and drag over these various steps, changing the velocity however you want, or going right back at the top and just dragging across all of them and bring them back up. Changing the velocity completely can transform the sound quickly. If you set these key select numbers all to 1 through 4, for example, I put 3, 2, 3, and then some 1s, you're going to get further variation once I play this. If I go up to this key replace option and go through some of these options, when it's on off, it's going to play back exactly what it says. But if I go to ARP or rest or any of these other options, it's going to begin to take some of these notes and move them in different order as well. Then you have this wrap drop-down list, which goes from 1 to 32. You can pick any number you want out of here to where things were going to re-trigger. Again, you're just going to get different variety if you experiment. Right now it's off. But let's say I want it to re-trigger after every 3 notes. If I move 3 in here and then play it. Some other ways you can quickly affect these steps. As I drag over these, if I come back and hold my shift key, it immediately selects every step. If I kind of click in the middle of one step, then I can drag them all down and up as I need to. Or I can go to the side of any step, and I can make them smaller that way as well. If you go to any step and kind of click right in the middle top, hold Shift and Alt, you can then drag a straight line ramp. If I hold Control and click on a step, it resets it back up to its full value. And if I hold Shift and Control and click on any step, it resets them all to their top value. Then you have one more interesting option here. If I hold Shift and make these smaller increments, I can then come down to these very bottom numbers. If I click below them, I get a legato. In other words, a little arrow shows up. And then those sounds will connect for an interesting effect. If you turn off steps like I've done on a couple of these, you can right-click on a step before it's empty, and you have the option to fill a gap, and you'll get this kind of an effect. Another way to introduce some kind of random sound, you can move the phrases left or right with these arrows. As it's playing, if I shift it to the right, back to the left. You have a button that allows you to reverse the phrase. In other words, whatever's happening in the beginning goes to the end. You have a button that'll actually duplicate the phrase. And that wraps up our discussion of the FlexPhraser and Halion Sonic7. All right, it's going to wrap it up for today. As always, if you haven't already, click the link below this video to learn how you can get access to the all-new Digital Audio Manual Preferred. It's the clear, step-by-step solution showing you not only the tips, but all the secret and typically never talked about features that'll take you to a higher level of using your software. If you've been searching for an all-in-one solution to take you from start to finish and learning Cubase and Wavelab and other music software, this is exactly what you've been looking for. So click on the link below and come and be part of the clear path to a better learning experience. So we squeezed all our last bit of information from the FlexPhraser into this last video. We talked about recording the MIDI outputs. We looked at the Flex demos. Talked about creating and copying variations, key select and the key replace, and how to use the wrap, all the different ways to edit the steps quickly. Talked about how to reverse phrases and then duplicate phrases. Next time we'll move on to another topic as we continue to go through all these different features and functions in Cubase. As always, it's great to have you guys here, and I'll see you on the next video.